I was just thinking to myself, I was looking at Wayne's LinkedIn profile last night, and I was in Atlanta with a PhD from Carnegie Mellon sitting next to me, and I sort of kind of backtracked a little bit. I don't think I've ever met somebody from Carnegie Mellon who isn't like super smart, which is kind of a real testament to the institution. It's today's presentation is about the fundamentals for building software architecture, I guess, and Wayne obviously is the CTO for Catalytic Data Science. We seem to be importing a lot of talent, and that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned, into the Charleston community. Just reading off a little section of his LinkedIn profile. Wayne is a dynamic executive and visionary with more than 18 years experience developing, managing, and growing a business from startup to exit. He has a proven technical track record in driving architecture, design, and development of a world-class cloud-based platform which combines, interestingly, natural language, artificial intelligence, and speech recognition. Wayne will probably, you'll learn a little more about Wayne, so I'm not going to take away from him. So without further ado, Wayne Scull. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also want to make one quick, it's really not a plug, but it's just the Charleston County Economic Development Office. A lot of these guys have been standing on the sidelines watching the success of the Charleston Digital Court. I got an email from the director late last fall saying that they would like to start sponsoring some of the activities here. So for the first time ever since the Friday series started, the Charleston County Economic Development Office is a sponsor for this event moving forward.
Awesome. Fantastic.
About time.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Good morning. So, a little bit about today. We're going to get you a little bit of familiarity with Catalytic and what we're trying to accomplish here in town and what we're excited about. Some philosophy on software engineering. The challenges with enterprise software. I think some people in the crowd mentioned a little bit earlier that they're well familiar with those. Some foundations for success, and then just some thoughts and questions. So what we're trying to do is build a digital workspace for researchers and scientists. So if you think about a day in the life of a researcher, they have a lot of disparate data sources, trying to pull all those data sources in and make decisions on what gene or protein they might need to interrogate and get in towards the lab. So we're a bunch of life scientists and software engineers that are trying to bring together this digital platform and help them drive innovation and bring their cures and therapies to market faster. So I'm going to show a quick video that Mike back there helped us with, and Courtney on our team, who I think some of you met earlier, drove from our end. And I lied.
Can I quickly tee that up, Wayne?
Yeah, please.
I do want to say that I think this is an outstanding video, and the guy who actually made it is now shooting Friday.
The life sciences industry spends more than $100 billion every year on research and development. Brilliant scientists are using powerful new technologies to produce data, analytics, patents, and research articles faster than any other time in history. As a whole, these vast and growing resources represent a golden opportunity to accelerate the pace of discovery in medicine, agriculture, renewable energy, sustainable products, and bioremediation. And yet today, researchers still lack an organized and structured way to quickly tap this digital river of information. As it stands, valuable data is spread across countless repositories, often in hard-to-search formats, making it very difficult to find and nearly impossible to use at scale. Researchers spend far too much time looking for information rather than thinking about their work, which not only limits productivity, but also adds time and cost to research and development programs. We should be making it easier to locate information needed to complete a task, streamline collaboration among teams, and make faster, more informed decisions. Catalytic's mission is to do just that, to give the brightest minds in science the best tools to leverage critical information resources that are key to driving innovation. The Catalytic digital workspace connects researchers with the world's life sciences data, information, and analytics in a single, integrated, and highly secure cloud-based platform that is designed specifically for how life scientists work. We perform the heavy lifting of aggregating, processing, and indexing large data sets, and couple this with robust analytic tools so that scientists can efficiently utilize the immense amount of available information. The Catalytic digital workspace has been designed to function as either a standalone informatics hub or can be integrated with your company's proprietary resources to achieve far greater domain coverage in your area of expertise. Enterprise-grade security, embedded team messaging, and availability on any device anywhere offer an all-in-one solution for unprecedented productivity and streamlined collaboration. We're connecting researchers to the resources and tools they need and transforming life sciences companies into efficient digital enterprises with the digital workspace from Catalytic.
That gives you a little bit of context to which some of the problems that we have to solve from the enterprise perspective. So I wanted to set the foundation for our talk today. Here's a little bit about me. I'm a cheer dad. I actually have 3 daughters. One's older. She's still up in Pittsburgh, finishing nursing school, but I get to chase these 2 around and carry a lot of cheer bags and that sort of thing on the weekend. So to jump into philosophy, you know, it really, there's a big difference between someone that can code and understands the craft of being an engineer. And I'd like to highlight that is a big differentiation because whether you're a quality engineer, a DevOps engineer, a software engineer, or security engineer, knowing what your craft is and being able to hone it is way different than somebody that can maybe follow a tutorial online. And with that, I'm sure there's a lot of you out there that understand agile and the process, and that's critical, absolutely critical. But I think you can change things a little bit in your organization if you drive a little bit from a philosophy standpoint. And this one's first, and it's first on purpose, delivering business value first and foremost. It's so easy when you get into technical conversations to lose sight of that. And then even when you get into managing metrics around your team and how your team or your Scrum teams are performing, to lose sight of that. I try to preach with our Scrum teams and what we're doing here. Remember, it's about the business value first, and that has to carry all the way up through the organization as well. So that when executives are asking, you know, what's the velocity, how are we performing as an organization, look, are we providing the business values we need today and as quickly as we need to? Change, it happens, right? There are developers that, just like the ones that potentially write notepads, aren't comfortable with the concept of, wait, you mean from this sprint, which is normally a 2-week process for those that aren't technical in the crowd, from this group of work in this 2 weeks, you mean I could be doing something completely different in the next 2 weeks? Yeah, you will be. Quality working software, right? So, you know, what are the underlying things, and we'll get to these when we get to the foundations, but what are the underlying things that you need to be thinking about and putting a process in place to be able to do that? Because otherwise you can end up stepping on your toes and getting in your own way quite a bit. How are we going to measure our teams, right? So you measure them on the output, and the output as a collective team. Sure, we get into individual things, and as your team finds its stride and its velocity, you can start to hone individual employees, but the idea is they're self-organizing, and they're going to help themselves strive for this because of the general competitive nature and belief in the product. And if you build this sort of culture from the start, you can win with it. And I can get into some of the things and maybe some sidebar conversations around how, you know, particular events or doing things differently from this perspective, meaning you're managing very tightly on, you know, hours or something of that standpoint, can really turn a team quickly against you, and that's all the effort you're going to get out of them. And that points to my last point on this slide about maintaining a pace. And every time I say this, people kind of laugh because it is funny, at least to me. You know, use the word sprint and agile, and everyone says sprint. But I try to teach people that This is a marathon. Being in a startup or starting a new business is a marathon. You can't work 20-hour days for X number of period of time and expect to have people to be, have quality work or not burn out. It just doesn't work that way. I've done it in my 20s. I tried to fight that battle and eventually learned through banging my head against the wall enough that it doesn't work that way. Here's a nice quote that I like. Don't ever promise more than you can deliver, but always deliver more than you promise. And I think it's relevant because you always get into that chicken and the egg. When's it going to be, when you're asking a development team, an engineering team, when's it going to be done? When's it going to be done? And yes, there are a lot of ways to forecast things. And engineers do want to deliver, but there are a lot of things that get in the way in between there. So if you have that in mind, it's kind of a slight turn. Some more on philosophy. You want to have attention to technical excellence and good design paradigms. I tend to preach that we want to be conventional. We don't want to be hackers, right? Developing software is not rocket science. It's not. It is a craft, and you have to hone that craft and understand your processes and your patterns that you need to have. Once you have those, you should be solid. There are times for rocket scientists, don't get me wrong. When you're writing those algorithms, when you're doing X, Y, and Z, that's such a small percentage normally, depending on what software you're building, it's normally such a small percentage of the total application. Strive for simplicity. The simple solutions are often the best solutions. I talked about self-organizing teams. If we have to tell everybody, well, you need to put in 12 hours today because we need to get this done, you probably already failed. The team should already understand that. They've already committed to that chunk of work. And then this one's last because it's very important. Everybody wants to have a sense of control in their work, in their life, in home life too. And being able to iterate and reflect on the development process as a team, as a sprint team, scrum team, is extremely important. So we have to keep that in mind, right? This isn't set in stone. There's agile, enthusiasts that say it's got to be X, Y, or Z. It's got to be what works for your team, and let them hone it. Obviously, you have to keep them on the guide rails, but need to keep them reflecting. Okay, so I don't know, show of hands, I think there were some that have worked on enterprise software in the room. Okay, great. So this will probably resonate. And I know there are way more in terms of problems, but these are sort of the top ones that are first to mind to me and cover a lot of big buckets, if you will. You really get one shot to get it right. Your customers aren't going to accept failing software. That gets in the industry, and you might as well just pack up. You have to be able to scale to their demands and be high available, right? So the 4 nines that we all chase, you have to design for that from the start. Security needs to be baked in at multiple levels. It can't be an afterthought. And we need to be able to respond quickly with new features. That one tends to be an afterthought, right? So everyone says, okay, I understand those. But responding quickly with new features and how to do that in an enterprise environment isn't easy, right? That's kind of tricky because if you don't set up your process right from the beginning, you might put things in place that inherently force longer delivery times. So we talked about keeping things simple. Steve said a lot of things, but this was one of the things I think he really strove for in his life and in his designs that most of us are probably holding today and is running this presentation. So we talked about some of the problems, and if anyone wants to throw a few more out and we can just have an open discussion, I'm happy to do that, or we can wait towards the end. That's honest.
So Wayne, when you talked about you have one shot to get it right, can you give us some practical suggestions on how to achieve that?
Mm-hmm. Good question. So what we've done is prototype with some friends, right? With some close companies that we know and we have relationships with. You work on that prototype for a period of time until you think you get it right to a beta. And then once you have a beta, you go back to maybe a little bit larger subset of those friends, and you ask them to participate in the beta, and you have a strong process to collect feedback and understanding in terms of, okay, do I have product market fit, right? So once you have product market fit, then you need to understand whether or not you've built the application so that it is reliable, right, and resilient. And until you have sort of that scalable, reliable, resilient piece, so you have product market fit, you know exactly what the customers are going to want, so it's not going to fall flat on its face from the start. And then you need to make sure that it can scale and it's secure from that standpoint.
So my head scratcher is, and I spent a couple of years with EMC, so it's a $14 billion company.
That's a big company, sure.
Yeah, and on the software side, mainly on sales, you talk about product market fit. Quite often I found the product team, the engineers would say, we just built this. Now let's go ask some customers if they can use it.
Right.
So what are you doing prior to even building and going to, you talked about going to friends for the prototype. What are you suggesting pragmatically we do to gather to see what, if this is something the market needs?
Sure, and when I use the term friends, it was more colleagues in the industry, that sort of thing. It's not, your buddies down the street, so I apologize for the choice of vocabulary there. But, our CEO comes from the industry, and I'll just speak to Catalytic because it's first in mind, obviously. He comes from the industry, has about 28 years experience. So he himself lived these problems, right? So oftentimes, great companies grow out of people that have passion about what problem they're attempting to solve, and he's passionate, and we all are at Catalytic passionate about helping researchers and scientists get their cures and therapies to market faster. So having lived that for X period of time, he was a great sort of user, if you will, and he knew a lot of people like him in the industry. So you'd like to say oftentimes at this level, is there a formal process? Yeah, it was formal, but not in the sense of an EMC formal. Certainly at that level you have different sorts of processes in place, but taking detailed notes, asking detailed questions, having meeting upon meeting upon meeting, letting them play with the software in front of you, see how they use it. So your typical A/B testing sort of things, if you will, and really drive those features from the customer. And that's what he and we strive to do at Catalytic is our customer is building this product. We're not building this product. And if you have that from the start, hopefully you have the product market fit when you get out the other end. If you got to keep those feedback cycles tight. Yes?
Just for clarification.
Sure.
Your customers tend to be both universities, research centers, and industry?
That's a great question. So right now our target market are 2,000 small to mid-cap pharmaceutical companies.
Oh, okay, great.
We recognize that, as we grow and evolve, there may be some academic interest, and there may be some other areas that we would participate, but right now we're laser focused on that. And that was another thing that really drove me to coming on to Catalytic was having the product market fit and understanding that we know who our customers are, right? I've been an entrepreneur since I was 24 years old, and those two things, capital is obviously important, which is great to have, but those two things in and of themselves are hard to find, and you'll see a lot of startups just fail right out of the gate because they didn't focus there. So, anybody else? All right. So in terms of foundations for success, I have 4 buckets. I know there are probably more. These will touch kind of very broad. Continuous delivery. I feel that is a foundation for your culture as an engineering firm, and really allows you, when we get back to delivering features faster, that's going to set you up to be able to do that if you have that baked into your DNA from the start. Flexibility and scalability. Thinking along those lines from the start in terms of monolith versus microservices and how you're deploying from a horizontal scale standpoint. You have to answer those questions up front. Resiliency, right? We talked about the 4-9. So if a part of the system fails, and some of you may have heard of things that are out there now like Chaos Monkey, where you're actually designing your application to have any given part fail at any given time. So that's important. And then cybersecurity and just generally security is super important in the enterprise, but super important to all of us right now as well. So baking in multiple layers of security from the start and having that be at the forefront and not an afterthought. So as I said, for us, continuous delivery is more than a process. It really defines our culture. We have to be able to continuously iterate and deliver quality software. We want to be able to push out software every 2 weeks to our customers, right, based on their feedback and their requests.
When you say push out, so you mean just developing the existing software? It's not new software tools you're pushing out every 2 weeks. But it's
Maybe new features. It could be refactoring. It could be fixes. It could be new features, right? So we want to be of the mindset of we're production ready all the time. So a release shouldn't be a Big Bang theory. And in that, every team member has responsibilities. So we talked about self-organizing, autonomous teams. I don't like the concept of throwing anything over the wall, and leaving somebody holding the bag at the end of the sprint or middle of the sprint going, I don't know how I'm going to get this done, right? So the teams are the teams, and they're there in the trenches together, and everybody can participate. And so DevOps isn't saying, wait, you have the constant battle where Dev says it works on my machine, and then send it over to DevOps, and they go, I don't know what this is, or where's this file? And then making it be repeatable and reliable, right? So having a strong pipeline in place to be able to do that. And that takes some code as infrastructure, and it takes a good continuous delivery or CI pipeline. Again, being production ready. Software is deployable throughout its life cycle. And we try to organize in the sense of we're delivering these features, not having a particular Scrum team working on 5 different agendas. Sometimes that can be hard to manage depending on what stage you're in, but we strive towards that.
So on that
Yes.
topic of managing this, do you, for lack of a better term, do you have a traffic cop, or is there a title you can give us on someone who is overseeing all these different moving parts to move it in forward?
So there's a couple layers to that. That's a great question. There's a couple layers. So it starts with the Scrum team in of itself, right? So you have built into your automation pipeline, you have various gates, whether they're testing gates or business gates. You have gates that go into the deployment pipeline. Then on each sprint team, at least the way we're doing it, is we have, whether you want to call it a product analyst, a business analyst, or a scrum master, whatever it might be, each team has their own. So you have an individual cop there. And then at the next level up, so it's past all the gates, at the next level up we have also then a product manager that kind of gives the final sign off. So as far as being production ready, you have, and I can share with this afterwards if you give me email addresses and that sort of thing. We have a checklist that's fairly long, about I don't know, there's 26, 27 items in terms of generally being production ready. Some of you guys in the industry probably have your own as well. And in that you have how do we get to production sort of mapped out, and every organization is different in terms of what they feel those gates are.
Are you using Slack channels to communicate?
That's a great question. So embedded in our application, we have forked a version of an open source version of Slack, which is called Rocket Chat, and we've deeply integrated with that. As an aside, in future releases, we'll probably support other chats, but we felt that having that is important, and we actually use that as our team, so we have a lot of channels. We haven't integrated it yet to our CI/CD process, whereas if an item from the build sort of fails, if you will, or a checkpoint doesn't pass, we're going to put some channels together so that everybody gets notified from that perspective.
I'm sorry if I missed this. I was a couple minutes late. What tool sets are you using to actually do your software development?
So what's our stack?
Yeah.
So we started out with Python and a Python monolithic app, Django, right? And we have a homegrown MVC, JavaScript front end, and we are in the process of refactoring that to a microservices-based architecture with Java Spring Boot and React and Redux. But I will say that in the sense of, if you have a true microservice-based architecture, it really, what you're deploying, what tool you're deploying in, we could have a microservice written in Node.js or Python or that sort of thing. My preference for the enterprise is Java. So that's where we are right now.
The container usage.
Oh, yes, we are deploying through containers in Docker, and our orchestration tool, we're just about finalizing that decision, but should be Docker Data Center. And I'll get into some of that sort of self-healing and that in a little bit, so thank you for leading me forward there. Push button deploy, that's the last thing to highlight, is being able to kick off this whole repeatable process and remove human error from the process. Having, I don't know if anybody's done any build release management here. It can be a nightmare if you don't have the right tools in place. So, build automation, key components, build automation and continuous integration, test automation. So we're striving hard from that perspective on threefold. Having strong front-end test coverage, and also looking at software to help us parallelize that, so it's not a long build piece. There's some new companies out there that we could talk about afterwards that we're starting to do some research on, and are quite interesting from that standpoint. Then you have the integration testing, and then all the way back to unit testing. So we're kind of trying to drive that all the way through the organization as well. And then deployment automation. Everything, infrastructure is code. We want it to be repeatable. We want it to be tested just the same way as our software is, and it's extremely important. What are the benefits? Probably pretty evident at this point, but you're reducing overall risk to deployment. So you don't have somebody sitting on call going, what the hell did we just release? Hopefully everybody knows that well in advance, and given it's automated, it goes the same as what's in the staging environment. Everybody gets to see progress consistently, so it's not the Big Bang Theory where you're waiting 3-6 months to see new features. And everybody in the organization has constant feedback as to how they're doing, right? So if I, as an engineer, know that every 2 weeks a new feature is going to be hitting the application, I'm pretty proud of that. So the second foundation item that I'd like to talk about is flexibility and scalability. I spoke a little bit before about microservices, and what we're trying to do is make sure that there are no inter-service dependencies within our services, and making sure that, and that means that there are no services that talk to each other. It's always a call from the front end or the user that drive that. Now there are some situations where that can't be avoided, and that becomes an interesting design paradigm, but we're really striving towards that. And that gives us the flexibility to upgrade various features and functions within a given microservice, so you're not necessarily redeploying the whole application on a given sprint. It might just be microservice X. Autonomy, we've talked about that. Polyglot engineering environment, it's important. Yes, we're standardizing on Java, but that doesn't mean we're stuck there, right? If we need to refactor a service because it's better written in Node.js, or there are advantages to use the next technology of the day, we'll certainly evaluate that. So I think everybody probably gets the whole microservices oriented architecture. I'm sorry.
Actually, could you go in a little bit more detail what you mean by that?
Which part?
Microservice.
So if you think about how an application might be broken up, it's defining those as their own sort of think about them as their own mini application, right? So you might have a company management portion, your customer management portion of your application, or a user management portion. Those could be 2 microservices. For us, we have search is a pretty big piece of our application, and Dennis back there is a member of our team. Actually is responsible for all the great things we do in search and NLP and NER, and please feel free to ask him some questions afterwards. But those are all independent applications that can be independently run without any other service or any other piece. So that's generally what I call a microservice. There may be some other flavors for sure.
Did your team have, did they have experience in microservice architecture before, or was that a tough transition for them as far as approaching how to build it?
It's always an interesting transition. Not so much in team, because I think a lot of engineers, at least the ones that you want to work with, have the willingness to learn new things, right? And that's one of the things I look for in any engineer that we're bringing a part of the team is, can I check the ego at the door, and am I willing to learn, right? So being able to talk about, well, how are we going to refactor, and this has been my philosophy of, when you're going from a monolith to microservices, there's 2 choices. You refactor, or you do the big bang, right? Where you start a completely different stack over here, and you have this one in parallel, and you're kind of running both sides up the flagpole until this one's no longer needed. I'm more of a fan of refactoring, right? So think of everything being in production and being production ready, being released. And then what we're going to do is consistently take a piece of that code and refactor it out until you refactor the entire monolith, and it's all service-based. So to answer your question, we did have some we did not. So it was a mix. So it can be a challenge, but I think if you're putting things in place where everyone can have a healthy dialogue about architecture and not have it become an esoteric debate, you'll be able to get to where you need to go. And obviously reach out for resources when you need to. Maybe you need to hire a solutions architect for a period of time if your team doesn't have that capability.
Do you see a benefit in refactoring over developing and ripping out part of the monolith into this microservice?
It reduces risk. So instead of in refactoring, you may be doing some rewriting. It's not that you're not doing rewriting. The challenge we always had was if you're just placing this sort of version of the monolith that you have in production and you need to continue to support, how do you have the resource, do you build up a whole nother team that is only focused on the new stuff? And then internally you're creating a little bit of strife, right? So it's, I'm working on the old stuff, and now we have the people working on the new stuff, and everybody always wants to work on the new stuff. So you have that constant trade-off there. It has its challenges, but I think overall it reduces the risk and helps, even at the executive level, them understand how we're going to transition from this current state to where we ultimately want to get to. Because oftentimes, especially executive, non-technical executive, you're going to run the situation where this big bang theory, and then they're asking you timelines, and then the second 1 or 2 start to slide a little bit, and you go, it's okay, we're going to get there. It starts to create a lot of stress, and then that stress can come downward into the organization as well, which you really don't want. I want to talk about dual horizontal scale. We do have containers and nodes. The idea with dual horizontal scale is that every microservice runs within a Docker container, and those can scale on a given virtual machine, if you will, or what I'll call a node. And those node clusters, and I think I have a slide next. Here we go. So the nodes would be the bigger middle tier there, just above the VPC boxes at the bottom. Those all would have container services running within them. So those can scale within the individual node, but then the nodes also auto scale based on demand. So it creates a dual horizontal scale opportunity for the application. So within a given subset of a microservice, you can set parameters within Docker Data Center to say, okay, my search service needs to be able to support this capacity at all times, and if it's not doing well, you need to take that service, that Docker container, out of the mix and launch a new one. And there are load balancers, those sorts of things in the front of it so that it can redirect traffic when one's down. But this design then, if those machines' individual nodes are full, can add another node to the mix as well. So you can continue to add more capacity both at the individual node level and across the cluster. This is a general high-level diagram of sort of our architecture. The top portion is where the orchestration management software runs, and you want that in multiple availability zones. And I apologize if we're going way technical. I tried to cater this a little more technical given the audience today. And those help tell you, you know, hey, these services are doing well. Where do they live? So service discovery, and then sort of the self-healing piece. The middle section we talked about are the nodes that actually run the Docker containers and do the majority of the heavy lifting in the application. And then down below, you can have your databases in a number of different configurations. Ours is actually interesting, and I could talk about it quickly and then take it offline for anybody that is curious. We cannot segment our customers within a given database, right? It's just, with life sciences, we're not allowed to. The extremely secure and concerned, and it goes to a point of which they don't allow their researchers to even search online for fear someone's sniffing the network, and would, just by knowing what terms they're searching for, could get a leg up on what kind of research they're doing. So it becomes very interesting, and you start to think about why security is so important in this space. So we're able to run this from a data source perspective, and then have every database in its own instance and mini cluster, if you will. It's a little bit more to maintain, but still we're able to deliver through one set of microservices and not have to replicate the environment.
Can you just clarify that? So this is fascinating, because so you're saying that if you've got like 3 clients, for example, each of them is going to have their separate base, and they're not going to be able to see.
They would have their own instance, yes, of their own instance of their database. They'd run the same structure, but they would have their database would be completely
So
segmented.
you're not going to see about what are the most popular searches today.
Correct.
And that's,
Within the organization, they'd see their own, and that's one of the things. Actually, it's a great question you just asked, because it's one of the things we're thinking about is how we improve the application across our knowledge base of all our customers without sharing information that might be sensitive. So that's our product team is actually talking about that right now.
How do those nodes relate to like a Docker image? I mean, is it?
So the node themselves, think of it as a virtual machine that runs the actual Docker image in a container inside the node. Yep. Yeah, so each one of those blocks there, and I think there might be a pointer on here. I'm not going to try. Each one of those might have 10, 15, 20 containers, depending on how large that node is. Some of our nodes need to be rather large, because one of the things we do is enable analytics to be run on a push button for our researchers. So if you think about just like the research we're ingesting, there's a ton of analytic tools out there that get written and paid for by grants that are open sourced, but only that researcher that wrote those tools knows how to run them and use them. So what we're doing is taking them and putting them into our, think about it as analytic app store, if you will, and Dockerizing them so that they can run them with a push button and a nice UI, not have to be a computer scientist to be able to conduct their research. Here are a few things just helpful if you want to learn a little bit about microservices. And Netflix is really sort of the gold standard. I know there are a lot of other companies that are doing things with microservices and that sort of thing, but I learn a lot when I go to Netflix. Their blog is great. Martin Fowler, him and a few of his colleagues really started sort of the coining the term microservices, at least I mean, there's probably some arguments out there. Maybe someone else did, but he speaks a lot about it. So there's some good stuff out there, and this new one is popped up and is pretty good too.
So, I mean, to me, it seems like microservices is a derivative of what used to be called service-oriented architecture.
It is.
Okay.
They're cousins or brothers and sisters. I mean, you could get into an esoteric debate about the main
Right.
differences, but yeah, they're very similar.
Okay, and so, what's interesting about this, I look at it as a very modern content management and communication platform. Having had clients like Pfizer in the past, one thing I know that they're going to want is security. I mean,
Yep.
So how are you allowing prospects like a Pfizer to kick the tires on the security of this?
That's a great question. Can I answer it when I get into
Absolutely.
the security part?
Yep, great.
So resiliency and Leanne.
I just heard that after last night's
So I'm a Pittsburgh Steeler fan. Full disclosure, being from Pittsburgh, and I came across this one, and I had to put it in here, knowing Leanne, who is here today and a great part of Catalytic, is a New England fan. So. All right, so for us it means high availability, dependability, and having a platform that keeps pace with our customers' needs. I think we've talked about high availability when you think about the dual horizontal scale, the multiple regions that the application will reside within. If one of those regions were to go down, we'd be able to still operate and not have fire alarms going off. Then you also have that second layer where if a particular service is performing poorly, it automatically will self-heal, take that out of the mix and launch a new one. So designing from this standpoint, you kind of get high availability and resiliency baked in. Our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising every time we fall. So your application is probably going to fail, right? So you need to be able to build things in place to get it back up and get it back up quickly without your customers knowing. Hopefully automated, right? And I don't know if I got that from a fortune cookie or not, but. All right. So we talked about leveraging containers and container orchestration, multiple availability zones, auto scale, and self-healing. I'm happy to dive in deeper. I want to make sure we save some time for questions, and I still got to get through another piece of this. Multi-layer security. So this Thomas is going to get into your point. So for us, it's critical, and there's no. We only get one shot at it. The second that there's a sense of anything being insecure about our platform, we might as well pack up. So we knew we had to build in from the get-go multiple layers, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But it extends beyond the platform, and it has to be part of our culture, right? So everybody in the organization has to understand and believe in what security means to us as an organization. So everybody likes Michael Scott, and I don't know if this was from that or from Anchorman, but I liked it. So you all out there that have insecure passwords. All right, so how do we achieve this, right? So we build it into our pipeline from the start, right? So in the continuous delivery, continuous integration pipeline, we're scanning. We're scanning our code, and we're scanning from any open source libraries. There are great companies out there that do this, and you bake it into your process from the start. You start with hardened, secure base images. Those images are your base images for your containers, and you constantly are reviewing and having those tested, and hopefully you can leverage some of the other experience out in the industry for getting super secure images, but only have turned on what you need within that base image. Obviously that image concept extends to your nodes, which would be your base OS for your EC2 instance. In our case, we use Amazon. Encryption in transit and at rest. For us, we have to be HIPAA secure, HIPAA compliant, right? There's not necessarily HIPAA data in our platform, but there could be conversations when you start thinking about clinical trials and those sorts of things that are going on. So
when you say conversations among the communication and the team, that would be part of the content?
There could be annotate. So part of our application supports annotating papers. So there could be some trade back in that standpoint. Could be in our chat channels, right? You can share in and out of chat, those sorts of things. So, if you have a foundation of encryption and transit and arrest, you're off to a pretty good start. And we just, no service or anything that gets built that's just default, right? Then you wrap things within a virtual private cloud. You control the access. The application would have authentication, potentially dual factor. Then you also bake in a managed security service provider. So this is kind of a relatively new, but some of the big boys have been doing it for a while. There's a lot of new companies popping up offering some great services where they'll help manage your infrastructure account at Amazon and let you know when somebody did something that's out of policy. Yes, you can build that all yourselves, but it's great to have a third party doing that for you. And then they'll do DOS and vulnerability. They'll do logs, so they'll scan your logs on a daily basis and letting you know if anything's going on there and be 24/7 support for you. I really like having this because I can't hire that talent and keep it current, right? So the second you hire a security provider and have them in-house, they have to do so much research on their own. It's going to be really challenging to keep that skill set up to date. So we really like having a security provider.
Who do you use?
We're in the process of vetting actually right now. So Alert Logic is one of the ones that I'm vetting, and I can tell you a couple of the others. But I really like what Alert Logic is offering right now. We've compared their features and functionality to that Alien Vault, which I know isn't a service provider per se. It's kind of do it yourself, but we wanted to make sure that those features were in there. And we've looked at some of the other big boys like Oracle and some of the others that have an offering in the mix. Okay, awesome. And then having an application firewall. One of the things your security provider can offer is potentially managing that firewall for you as well. Again, let them do that and be able to alert you because that's what they live and breathe. Allows you to focus on your software and your value add to your customers. And that's really how we're structuring things at Catalytic. We want to focus on our core and where we add value and let others that have done great work, we can leverage that, and that way we're not managing extra lines of code and stepping outside of our areas of skill. So that's all I had today. Thank you all for listening and participating. I certainly want to answer any more questions. Before I do that, though, a few books that I really enjoyed that I think help from an organization standpoint. If you need any more info on those, I can certainly share that with you afterwards. Sure.
You mentioned at the top of the talk, one of the measures of success is the delivery of working software. And so it's really easy, I debate with people in the organization all the time about metrics like number of bugs closed, number of support tickets raised. Those are all very quantitative and they don't go very far towards helping you measure quality software. So
Sure.
Thoughts or advice on what kind of metrics, qualitative metrics can be put into place or what you can use to create the qualitative metric around the delivery of quality software?
So for me, it starts before the qualitative, right? It starts a little bit with a mindset and test-driven development, right? So if just like security, you're baking those concepts into every engineer's mindset, where the unit tests, and you have, and that's as part of our Scrum teams. We do have a QA engineer on every Scrum team, and as part of that, we want to make sure they're being the cop there in terms of unit tests, that sort of thing, integration tests. So we're keeping stats in terms of the pipeline when those things happen and that sort of coverage. I think in terms of a qualitative standpoint, we try to also look at the time involved, right? So measuring the time to get it sort of where it is bug free. But I think you're on a solid track there in terms of tracking with, okay, how many on this particular ticket, how many times did a bug get opened against it, right? And where did that fall against test failures and that sort of thing. You said you had an internal debate. What's the debate?
I've just never found much value in trying to count the number of bugs raised and closed. I don't really think that goes.
Yeah, so if it's not automated, someone's sitting there going, that's a problem, right? And I agree with that. I think it's like anything when you start to think about velocity and you start to think about utilization, right? So if you're tracking your time to particular bugs and trying to get that 75% utilization rate and trying to push through velocity, it's a general guidance to say, all right, how are we designing this software? And I talked about this being an iterative process and improving it, and that's where the sprint retro is really coming into effect. Because if you're having a lot of defects in the software, there's probably something other than the engineer in play here. I mean, yes, at the end of the day, it could be an engineer that just needs to go back to school a little bit and get trained up. But it's most likely there's something in the process that's failing, whether it's communication on requirements, the stories weren't groomed enough, we overcommitted to something and I couldn't get anything done, so I was scrambling at the last minute.
It's
so that's
one of those things.
Yeah. So if you have in the mix, that's why we try to have the Scrum Master and on the individual sprint teams that's helping to understand, wait a minute, I'm at the end of this sprint or getting towards the end of this release and we have X number of story points, and if that number's a big number, there's a lot of risk left in that and something's wrong, we need to refocus and reset. So it's a collective, is I guess my answer long term. I think the stats are useful as a guide though.
Playing off of that though, do you also look though at customer reactions in terms of customer complaints? Because you're a subscription service, right?
Mm-hmm.
So renewals and all of that. I mean, it's not directly related, but certainly it's a big.
No, that all factors into the measurement of are we producing quality software, right? And quality can mean, does it work as designed, but then was it designed as it needs to work? So that factor as well. So that's an excellent point. Yeah, we're working on our customer service funnel, and I think that's interesting in terms of how that funnel ties into working with quality on the team and product. So you have to be mindful there in how you structure that.
You mentioned TDD. Just a lot of times dealing with clients, I find that they're kind of caught in a difficult situation where on one hand they're trying to produce code that's really quality code, but on the other hand they're also trying to watch cost, the agility. So as you do test-driven development, you lock yourself into sort of your code base gets more and more locked in over time. How do you how do you promote that, and what's your kind of philosophy on TDD? Is it worth the extra cost when you bring it in next time?
So, as with anything, right, you have to balance the pendulum and how far it swings right or left. Mm-hmm. I think when you're set from a microservices standpoint, yes, you could be locked in for that service, but the next service may need to go down a different path, right? So you have some flexibility there. I think it's just solid behavior to have your engineers be able to replicate their acceptance criteria in their unit tests. That forces it back to everybody on the Scrum team and everybody in the product lifecycle, right? So that if those acceptance criteria weren't defined correctly, well, I can prove that I understood and I did what I was supposed to do because of that acceptance criteria. And then that funnels all the way up through your CI and CD process, right? So you then have the unit tests that are running before, at the development level. You could even talk about before you do a full release that you're running back through unit tests, then you go up to your integration tests and your front end testing. So all of those things have happened before you're releasing the software. So I can sleep a little bit better at night knowing that I think we have a solid quality product and not have to be worrying about that bug that, you know, somebody didn't test or somebody didn't find or something creeping up. Sure, things happen, but that's where the iterative part of your process comes in place, and building it all so it works together.
We'll take one more question and then wrap up.
I'll ask another. You mentioned self-organizing teams as a
Mhm.
really important aspect of a successful kind of Scrum approach.
Mhm.
And you said, you know, if you have to tell the team that we need to put in a few 12-hour days to get this release over the line, you probably already failed. So that's really a statement of commitment from the team. And that's, I guess, so that's a challenge, right?
It absolutely is.
It always is. I've got a team of talented folks, but I spend a lot of time chasing them up and following up on things that I really prefer that they just take ownership of and drive to completion. So I guess the question is, how do you force the team to self-organize?
Inherently. So,
Is that another session, by the way?
it very well could be. What we're trying to do is from the start, when I talk about continuous delivery being a culture, is to shift our culture there. And if you shift that culture there and everyone says, I have a part and I see where my part is and I get to kind of define my part in that organization and how I contribute, and I have a say in, you know, my sprint retrospectives and that sort of thing, is to, hey, we didn't do this well last time. Because the last thing an engineer wants to do is have the never-ending list, right? And that's the thing that if you shift to this process and this idea of culture, you know, there's always going to be software to write. There's always going to be bugs to fix. You know, an engineer's kind of chasing that, when's my list going to end, when's my list going to end? So then their mindset becomes, well, what's the difference if I put in 12 hours, 15 hours, or 10? There's always going to be more work to do. Come on, manage it differently, would you? You know, so if you put it on them as a team and say, these features are really important to our customers, we have to get them out. Then they can say, through, again, having part of this whole autonomous and the continuous delivery process, that, yeah, I'm going to commit to getting this done. And if I miss that commitment, hey, you know what? That's on me, but I don't mind putting that extra time in because I made the mistake and I don't want to let my team down. Now, it's not to say that you don't have to nudge and you don't have to set things in motion at times. But again, I always feel that if I'm telling, I'm probably already in trouble.
But there's a flip side to that too, right? I mean, you're setting a deadline, and if the team is saying that's unrealistic, right? If they're constantly, there's two things. One, if they're constantly missing and having to work 12-hour days, it means that there's a problem in the process and they're not able to estimate correctly.
Yep.
And that's going to hurt you in the long run. And the other side, if they're having deadlines pushed on them, when they know it's going to take 2 sprints to get this done, and you're saying, well, I have to get this feature out in 1, you're going to pay for that in the long run in quality, because they're going to be burning.
And I completely agree with you, and I'd shift, and I'll get to your question in 1 second. And I shift that to agree with you to say, I'm not setting the deadlines,
Right.
they're setting the deadlines.
Yeah. I'm just going to commend you for using the term continuous delivery in that mindset, because from a change perspective, getting people to think about always improving, always doing that is really important. And
Thank you.
what Carol Dweck just really harps on is if you really want to get people to change and to be learners and all of that, that's what to talk about.
Thank you. It is a different mindset, and a lot of engineering shops are not fortunately run from that perspective. And you know, engineers get into that, you know, carrot and stick and all that sort of thing all the time. And we're really striving not to have that here, and have our culture be about continuous learning, continuous delivery of quality software. And I think that'll help us win long term.
So I have a question in terms of deadlines. A lot of things you mentioned are internal deadlines. What if you have a contract with that deadline? Like, so, I mean, like, from the standpoint where a contract is ready to sign, how long does it take from executive levels to their development team? Like, what's the process there on some of the
So we're an enterprise software stack. So from our contract perspective, when someone signs up, they're signing up to use the system as is, right?
Right.
Any features that we add or whatever is just continuously improving the software for everybody. in your case, in terms of if it's more of a consulting opportunity or, maybe somebody within the organization overpromised, hopefully that doesn't happen too often. Then you got to say to the team, and I've done this throughout my career, all right, guys, this is the ball we've been dealt. What can you accomplish? What can you do? And where's the gaps, right? And if the gaps are, we just can't get there from here, then I say, okay, well, I need resource X, Y, or Z to accomplish this. And I go back to the person that sold the deal and let them know this is what happened. And, sometimes you're in that box and you have to, hopefully if you built a team from this perspective with a continuous delivery mindset and self-organizing, that they'll recognize the value. From a leadership perspective, you always have to explain the why, right? If you explain the why, people can swallow it. People stand up and help make it happen. If it's just the, hey, go do this, you're never going to get there. You might get there for a short season, but you're not going to in a long time. And I always try to tell everybody that if we are running long hours, and again, 10 hours is not a long hour day from my perspective and our team, it naturally happens. Not saying that everybody works those hours every day, but we're trying to change some lives here and hopefully improve some lives. But if we're doing 15 hours or longer on a given period of time, then you might say to I say to them, then we're doing something wrong and it's my fault, and I need to figure out how to fix that. Whether it's more resources, changing the process, whatever it might be. Here, I'll go here first because you have one already.
So if you're looking at your team to set the timeline for how you're going to get things done, if you're at zero and you just have some idea for a new software product you want to develop and you don't even necessarily have your team created yet, how are you thinking through, just from a business planning perspective, how long it's going to take you to get to where you want to get with your first version of your software?
Okay, so you don't have a team, you have an idea, right? So in those cases, you have to have some champions, right? You have to find some engineers that are going to be champions. Maybe depending on your capital constraints, you can hire a consulting company and get you your MVP, right? And then once that's done, then you start to build the culture towards where you want to go and project forward. Yeah, I agree. When you're just at the idea stage, a lot of these things are difficult to strive towards. You have to put in those lifts or get a consulting company that can expand your resources. But if you do have that consulting company, chances are they're going to probably run with a similar mindset. You just have to be prepared for the iterative nature at that point. And that's where you want to make sure you put things in place. Everyone's heard the term fail quickly, right? So just with software, iterate quickly, have short feedback loops. And if you build that from the start, that then starts to lend itself towards the continuous delivery, towards what we're talking about building here.
Kind of along the feedback loops, we talked about bugs and tracking that as a measure of success. Are you doing any kind of metrics to see usage of new features? Do you have any metrics to say which ones are successful or not?
We're having those conversations. Normally the answer is yes, you want to do that for sure. We're having those conversations internally with the product team because we need to make sure as we're tracking, we're not potentially opening ourselves up to concerns from an IP perspective for our customers. But yes, we do want to have tracking to say, all right, this service is being used. And inherently we'll have that based on the back-end metrics, right? I'm speaking more towards the front-end usability testing, and I think that's where you were really going. There's some tools out there that you can embed that really help with that. We haven't gotten to that point yet. We're mostly looking at from the back-end perspective and then making sure we're sterile in terms of IP concerns with our customers.
Wayne, thanks. We will be around for another 10 minutes, so if you guys have some questions, follow-up questions, feel free. We're real proud of Catalytic's progress and success here at the flagship. I had one thing, thanks to Liz Guthridge. I'm always busy, and I actually noticed when I went to make some changes to a document, I had started working on the document in 2014. And for most of you guys who know me, I don't really sit around waiting for a lot of stuff. It just kind of happens. One of the things that we wanted to do from these series, there's a lot of questions that come up. And so what we're doing basically in March, we will not do a Fridays of the Quarter in March. We will actually have Biz Camp, basically, which is the business side. I mean, Wayne's alluding to a lot of the business side of technical delivery and that kind of thing. So we're going to do a day-long session. We haven't decided whether it's 4 or 5 topics, starting at 9 o'clock in the morning and up at 4, followed by a brief happy hour right here. That's going to be held twice a year. So the topics are going to go from intellectual property to, the HR issues to, sales and marketing issues. And, they're focused on tech. So basically, they're limited to 25 people, and they're going to be focused on tech companies. So this is not, we're not agnostic here, to the baker, the bangle maker. So that's kind of coming, and if you've come and we've got your email address, you'll get an email with a one-page overview, and I would encourage you, you will only get the overview when it's ready to sign up. It's on a first-come, first-served basis. But it's all day. The professionals would be like when some who are within companies at the CDC. So the HR presentation is going to be made basically by Atlateral Software, the HR director at Atlateral Software. So who's familiar with the issues, so some of the issues that are coming up. 2 people on the outside. So, if you've got a partner and you start something, what about your intellectual property? What if your partner walks out the door and basically your company's gone with him or her? So these are issues we want. Legal is never basically interesting, but unfortunately something, for a guy who's been hosed twice, you would think I would learn, but I still keep operating the same way. So this is something basically, March 17th, is the date. It's the 3rd Friday, obviously, in March, and that's coming up. And I do. We just delivered. The other thing I was going to tell you, we delivered a facility like this in Beaufort, which is 1 block from a nice watering hole and 2 blocks from Main Street. So if you guys just need to get away for a day, all members basically have free access to the facility. It's really nice. I mean, it's a combination of kind of this and Flagship 2, and and so feel free to just drive down there. It's a beautiful drive, and take advantage of it as well. So I appreciate you all coming out. This is just a great way to start the year. And again, we talk about basically continuous improvement. That's how the CDC is where we are. Nothing is sacred around us. So if we can make it better, just let us know. So and